Hello everybody, welcome to my live video in which I'm going to be talking about working wet on wet. This is the first in a little series of what I love about watercolor, and I love watercolor. So let's begin. I'll tell you a little bit about the pigments that I'm going to use. So here you can see my palette, and I've got my three favorite colors. They are primaries: a warm yellow, Indian yellow by Winsor & Newton, quinacridone magenta, also Winsor & Newton. I love their PR 122 color pigment that's in that one, and also a phthalo blue, and this is a phthalo blue by Daniel Smith. Phthalo blue is pretty much the same across the brands, as long as it's a green shade. All right, and I love these three colors because they are close to being a perfect triadic. So a yellow, orange, a red violet, and a blue green. I put them in my little weld palette, and I'm going to stir them up with some water. For wet and wet, it's really essential to have wet paint. So pan watercolors don't work so well for this technique. I've got my little cheapy mixing brush, and I'm going to start with my lightest color, and I'm going to dissolve that all up. All right, I like to not use my really good brushes for stirring up the paint. That puts a lot of wear and tear on your good brushes, and you want to keep those for the painting. So these cheapy little nylon brushes, you can get them in your dollar store or cheap store, children's section, are great for this. And this was a lovely tip by one of my students, actually. All right, I've got my three colors mixed up. And I like these three colors because they will make a big range of secondary colors. All right, back over here. Today I've got Opus's finest watercolor paper. It's 100% cotton paper. It's got a little bit of a creamy finish to it, so it will change how the colors look a little bit. And it's not stretched, it's just tacked to my Gator foam board. And it's a pretty good one, even if you don't have it stretched. And for this demo today, I'm going to start with the dry paper, and I'm just going to take my moppier brush, and I'm going to splash some water on it. Now, I do like soaking the paper, and I will show that in another video, but just for today, I'm just going to talk about how watercolor paint moves around. All right, got that, just trying to get it spread evenly, not too puddly. It's very important in watercolor painting to be mindful of the time. So timing is really, really important. I've got my lovely colors mixed up, and I'm going to start by, I'll take my moppy brush again, it's cleaned out, and I'm going to pick up some of this yellow, and I'm going to drop that onto the paper. And you can see how wet that is. It just wants to move around. All right. A little bit of that. Now I'm going to maybe change to another brush, and I'm going to pick up some of my red magenta, and I will pull that through and see what happens. Okay, so you can do lines. I could go back to the flatter brush and drop some of this in, or pull some of that over there. Now the paper's going to start to dry up as I'm painting on it. Let me see. I'm going to just drop some. Oh, I got a little bit of dripping paint. If you want to do that, you can. You'll get a really big movement the wetter the paper is. So now I'm going to come with my blue. Now, the timing, as I said, is everything. So if you drop color into a really wet puddle like this one over here, it's just going to become a really big mess of color. But if I come and work over here where the paper started to dry a bit, I'm going to get a more controlled bloom. Maybe I'll pick that up, put some of that. It's also interesting to see what happens when you put two colors beside each other. Now these three pigments that I'm using are all transparent pigments, and they're the stainers. So they're also great for a lot of other things, but they have a lovely transparent quality, and they like to move around. And I'm tipping my board around, moving it around, letting things happen. You can see where I added those colors together. I'm getting something approaching black maybe. Where I've dropped them, where it's a little bit drier, they're really staying a little more constrained. When you're working wet on wet, you really have to stay with the painting. If you walk away, leave it, you'll often miss your opportunities for adding color in at important times. Working wet on wet, your colors want to fade. So you can see that this is fading. This blue line that has faded away. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to just drop in some more color to it. So this is what I mean when you have to pay attention. You got to watch what's happening, where the paint is kind of drying, where it might need to be intensified again. So wet on wet is the way we get these lovely soft finishes, and I love this technique for the backgrounds. So that's one of my loves about it, starting with wet on wet to get these soft colors in the background, and then you can come and do whatever you want on top of it. All right, now I'm tilting my board a lot. That's something I like to do with wet on wet, just making it run. And for today, it's an abstract. Maybe it'll turn into something else. I'm going to go back to my first color, the yellow, because that's kind of faded away. And I'm going to drop in and make some areas more intense. Dropping in is a method that we use a lot in watercolor. Oh, this magenta's dried a little bit. You can see that this yellow loves to just move. It's shooting out. Maybe I'll come and drop some into this blue. All right. This pink is faded away. That's kind of nice, but I think I will intensify just in a few more areas. Maybe pick an area along the edge. Keep some of that very soft finish. And I can see this one's holding the edge. So it's quite dry there. Whenever you get the hard edge, that's where the paper is dry. I'm just going to add a little bit more and play around here with different things. Now, where my paper is starting to dry up, another thing I like to do on the wet on wet is to just drop in clean water. And this is what often makes what people might call blooms. We can do it blooms with color, but if we use just clean water, we get some really interesting things, and basically it's just pushing the pigment away. All right. This is a pretty good paper. It's not buckling too much on me because I didn't stretch it. Well, let's turn that a little more. And I would just keep adding color where I think it needs it as it starts to dry. And you can see some of these lovely bloomy things. I can even make that bigger if I come in there and work along in certain areas, adding those little bits of water to it. You can also just draw with your brush through it, and sometimes that's a really interesting thing to do in the wet on wet. All right, so we learned about dropping other color into each other, intensifying the color as we're working on wet because it wants to kind of dissipate and go away. And we've got some really lovely color effects happening. And maybe I'll just do a little splatter where it's a little bit drier. It's going to really hold those things. And where it's not, it's going to just soften and disappear. I'm going to say that this is enough for today, and I'm just going to let that dry now and then see what happens with it. Thank you so much for joining me, Dixie, West Coast Lady Painter, if you want to follow me on Instagram. And I'll be doing more of these little demos about what I love about watercolor. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.